So let me give you the headline as if I was a climate alarmist type and exaggerating a lot. So the US has the least drought in history right now. And that's not entirely true, of course, but um, so this is based on a blog entry by Roger Puker Jr., who is, I think, an economist at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and he comments a lot about climate issues. And so he bases his assessment on the drought monitor, which is made by government agencies, and it essentially provides maps of how much area of the United States is currently in drought. And last week, so the time span goes since 2000, so it's a relatively short time span. This is why the historic record is not that impressive. But so last week, over 90% of the United States area were not in drought, which is a record in this time span. And more interestingly, the trend of areas not in drought is upwards since 2000 systematically. So the United States, contrary to what you would get from the headlines in the news over the last years or two, is not experiencing more drought. Quite the opposite. So the drought is increasing recently. And so that was last week, and the trend is relatively consistent. And I want to grab this opportunity to talk about problems I have with how these issues like droughts are communicated in the media and by some alleged experts. So we also see this in pollution trends, where you see something like, oh, more and more counties are out of compliance with the regulatory framework or something like this, right? And you don't get the big picture because in these articles and news stories, they tend to focus on one event or a short-term trend, and then they extrapolate this and ask an expert, oh, how is climate change impacting this negatively, for example? And part of this, I believe, is that there's a narrative out, particularly not necessarily by the scientists, but by the activists that are telling us something like what Bill McKibben often said was, oh, you can literally experience the climate change out there, when it's particularly hot in Texas. You can literally experience this. And this is, of course, literally impossible, right? As a human being, you cannot experience this. You cannot, experience the last summer season and then compare that with the summer seasons of the 1980s. There's no way for you to do that. You need sophisticated sensors and record keeping to, find out the average nuances in changes over time. And you can experience that. And you don't get the long-term context from these news stories. So when there's a wildfire in California, for example, which was, recently dramatically the case, then you get something, oh, yeah, climate change is, making things drier, and then you get more fires and more and bigger fires and so on. And, this kind of data that Pielke provided shows the big picture trend. So America is actually experiencing a non-drought phase right now, and a trend to less drought, right? And we need to rely on abstract and non-intuitive data, and that's very difficult for human beings, right? Because we have a relatively short attention span and cannot compare climate today with climate in the 1980s from our memories. So we need to look at this abstract data. And what I find particularly bad is that news reporters do not, or rarely do, provide this long-term, full big picture and full context to us. And that's, we Don talked about the Guardian's language choice, and this is, of course, not helping. But I mean, if you get the more information in the correct context, you can still have a different opinion on that, but at least that these basic facts we need to get straight. And otherwise we will be doomed to make very bad decisions. And, elections will depend on who can make a certain perception reality in the election cycle. And I think that's very bad long term. and for our understanding of reality. And in the climate issue, we can clearly see that. So people, have all these polls and surveys of likely voters, and they get to certain conclusions, but they are not getting there because they know the full context and the big picture and the trends, like this drought trend that I mentioned. They get to these on, sort of feeling, instinct, and narrative from the headlines.
So
And
then
that
what could we create that would be a good go-to reference on these things?
So one good reference is our data page from the moral case right now that already exists. That's industrialprogress.com/MCFF data. That's the latest. So you get some big picture data there. Okay, Pilke is doing a good job, I think, with many of the issues. So he's basically focused on the economic side of things. But yeah, we can. I think CIP is doing something on it. I think we could do more and should do more on it. And well, referencing things like that is a start, but I think we could also establish some more big picture data view on that, similar to the data page for the moral case for fossil fuels.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to think about what are the, I don't know, 30, like the 30 running sets of data that you would want to have. And then, at least for some of them, if not all of them, there are going to be qualifications about, okay, these are issues with the methodology. Even with the, let's say with the temperature records, you have issues of, will those get changed over time? And you can see the same agency will have a different account of the 1940s several decades later that's more conducive to the idea that, oh, the 1940s wasn't as warm as it seemed at the time, and it's much warmer now versus what what people thought about it in the 1970s or 1980s. So yeah, I don't know. Well, so let's make that a project to think about what would be the best big picture data set to track, and then what would you need included along with it.